15%. That's the number of Canadians who believe the economy will get stronger in the next 6 months. 15%. That's not a poll from a rough month in 2008. That's the Bloomberg Nanos Canadian Consumer Confidence Index as of April 3rd, 2026. 4 weeks ago, that number was 27%. It dropped nearly in half in 1 month. Nick Nanos, one of the most respected data scientists in the country, described what he is seeing as a clear negative trajectory, all indicators showing negative pressure simultaneously. That is real. That pain is real. And I want to be clear about something before we go any further. The economic anxiety the Canadians are feeling right now is legitimate. It is not manufactured. It's not spin. It is real, and it deserves honest answers. But here's what I want to talk to you about today. Because there is a difference between a politician who looks at that number and asks, how do we fix it? And a politician who looks at that number and thinks, good, my time's coming. I'm Kevin. Welcome back to the No Spin Up North podcast, because Canada deserves better than the arguments we're having. Today, I want to talk about anger. Who is manufacturing it? Why? And what it is costing us. I want to start with a man named Steve Bannon, Donald Trump's chief political strategist, because Bannon did something unusual for a political operative. He described his own strategy out loud, on the record. In 2018, he told author Michael Lewis, and I'm going to quote him directly here, "The Democrats don't matter. The real opposition is the media. And the way to deal with them is to flood the zone with shit." He elaborated in a PBS Frontline interview in 2019. "Every day we hit them with 3 things. They'll bite on one, and we'll get all our stuff done. Bang, bang, bang." That is the playbook, stated out loud. The goal is not to persuade you. The goal is to exhaust you, to overwhelm you, to generate so much noise, some true, some false, some misleading, that you can't possibly keep up. And in the exhaustion and the confusion, the fear grows. And the fear drives votes. Researchers who study democracy have called this strategy inherently anti-democratic. Not just a dirty tactic, inherently anti-democratic. Because it deliberately exploits the limited attention of citizens in a way that makes honest public debate impossible. This playbook has come to Canada, and the timing of its return right now, as economic anxiety is surging, is not a coincidence. Let me be honest about what is driving the economic fear right now, because it deserves a straight answer. The Iran war has pushed oil prices sharply higher. Trump's tariffs, 25% on most Canadian exports, 50% on aluminum, have frozen business investment and cost Canadian households an estimated $1,700 to $2,000 annually. The uncertainty around the CUSMA trade agreement review is making companies hesitant to expand and to hire. None of that was caused by Canadian policy. All of that was caused by decisions made by one man, one orange man in Washington, whose movement Pierre Poillievre spent 3 years embracing, whose convoy he bought coffee to, whose playbook he imported to Canada. And now, Poillievre is telling Canadians the economy is broken, while the man most responsible for breaking it is his political inspiration. That is not analysis. That is a strategy. And the strategy has a name, and you just heard it. Now I want to talk about immigration, because this is where the flood the zone strategy is going to run hardest over the next year. And Canadians deserve the full picture, not the version that's being designed to make them angry. So let me start with something that is true and worth saying directly. The Liberal government overcorrected on immigration after COVID. That is a fact. As Canada reopened and businesses needed workers, the government opened the tap and then left it open too long. International students surged to over 1 million active study permits in 2023. Temporary foreign workers flooded low-wage sectors, and the government was slow to acknowledge the pressure that it put on housing and public services. This is a legitimate criticism, and I am making it on this channel because it's true. But here's what Poillievre doesn't tell you. First, the provinces were pushing hard for more workers. Ontario and Alberta in particular were demanding more temporary foreign workers to fill labor gaps. Colleges and universities across the country, largely provincially regulated, were aggressively recruiting international students because the tuition revenue was filling budget holes. The federal government was responding to pressure from the provinces. This was not a unilateral federal decision made in a vacuum. And here is the detail that almost never gets mentioned. Why were the colleges so desperate for international tuition revenue in the first place? Because provincial governments cut their funding. In Ontario, the province with the largest college system in the country, the Doug Ford Conservative government cut tuition by 10% in 2019 and then froze it. Simultaneously, they froze direct provincial funding to colleges and universities. And then, and this is the part that should make your head spin, they explicitly encouraged colleges to recruit more international students to fill the gap they had created. Ontario's own Auditor General flagged this as a risky formula back in 2021. Nobody listened. Ontario ended up providing the lowest per student funding of any province in Canada, roughly half the national average. By 2024, 68% of all tuition revenue at Ontario's public colleges came from international students. 68%, 2/3 of the funding came from international students. So to be completely clear about who created this situation, a provincial Conservative government cut funding, told colleges to find their own money. Colleges found it through international students. And now a federal Conservative politician is telling you the whole thing is the Liberal government's fault. Both levels of government share responsibility here. But the provincial role, especially the Conservative provincial role in Ontario, is almost never part of the conversation. And that omission, it's not accidental. Second, and this is the part that almost nobody is talking about, the correction has already happened. Statistics Canada just released data showing that Canada's population actually declined in 2025 by over 100,000 people. The first annual population decline on record, dating back to the 1940s. Let that sink in. The problem Poillievre spent years screaming about, too many immigrants, too much pressure on housing, is being corrected right now. The numbers are moving in the direction he demanded. And you know what else is happening? Rents are coming down. The rental market has seen 17 consecutive months of rental declines. Rents hit a 33-month low in February 2026. The pressure is easing. Not fast enough, but it is easing. The problem is being solved. The question is whether you are allowed to know that or whether somebody needs you to stay angry about it. Now I want to talk about something that happened in Parliament in February of this year, because it tells you exactly what the flood the zone strategy looks like when it is applied to the most vulnerable people in the country. The Conservative Party put a motion before the House of Commons asking the government to review and restrict healthcare benefits for refugee claimants. The program in question is called the Interim Federal Health Program, the IFHP. It provides basic healthcare coverage to people who have filed asylum claims while their cases are being processed. The argument the Conservatives made was that the cost had risen dramatically from $210 million in 2020 to $896 million in 2025. And that is true. The cost did rise. But here's what they don't tell you. The IFHP represents 0.2%. That's 0.2% of Canada's total health spending of $399 billion. 0.2%. Canada spends $9,626 a year on healthcare per Canadian, and $1,645 per refugee claimant. Refugee claimants cost less than 1/5 of what Canadians cost the system. The cost rose because the number of asylum claims rose, not because the benefits expanded. The cost per person actually stayed lower than for Canadian residents. In 2025, 63% of finalized refugee claims were accepted as legitimate by Canada's own legal system, nearly 2/3. These are not, as Poillievre has suggested, bogus claims. Cutting refugee healthcare will not reduce the wait times for Canadians by a single day. The IFHP is a federal program entirely separate from provincial healthcare budgets. There is no connection. So the Conservative motion was not a healthcare efficiency argument. It was not to save money that Canadians would feel. It was not to shorten anyone's wait times at the emergency rooms. What it was is a signal to a scared electorate that someone is being targeted, that there is somebody to blame, that the pain you are feeling has a face. I want to ask you a straightforward question, and I want you to think about it honestly. A person flees their country because of war or famine or some other reason. They arrive in Canada, they file a refugee claim. While that claim is being processed, which can take years because of the backlogs of our own government has created, they get sick. They need a doctor. What does Canada do? Because the answer to that question tells you a lot more about who we are than any political debate ever will. The Liberals overcorrected on immigration numbers. That is true, and I've said it. But the Conservative response is not to fix the system. It's to punish the most vulnerable people in it, while the economics show the problem is already being corrected. Liberals opened the tap too wide. Now Conservatives want to punish people for getting wet. Neither of those is the full answer Canada deserves. Now let me talk about the man delivering the message, because the record matters. Pierre Poillievre has been a member of Parliament since 2004, his entire adult life, on the federal payroll. The same system he tells you is broken beyond repair. He tells people he was the housing minister. There was no housing minister under Stephen Harper. That role did not exist. What Poillievre actually held was the Minister of Employment and Social Development, briefly, in 2015. He was not the housing minister. He was never the housing minister. And yet he says it repeatedly, confidently, because most people won't check. Under the Harper government, while Poillievre sat at the cabinet table, average home prices in Canada rose 70%. He now campaigns against a 45% Liberal increase. His government was worse on the very measure he campaigns on. And he was not even the housing minister when it happened, even though he tells you he was. His government also refused to renew federal operating grants for social housing, resulting in 800,000 affordable rental units being sold to corporate developers. 800,000 units gone from the affordable housing supply. And those same corporate developers are now among his party's top donors. During the Freedom Convoy, a protest that 75% of Canadians wanted to end, that had Nazi flags and Confederate flags, that Trump personally endorsed, Poillievre stood on a highway overpass, filmed promotional videos, and called the protesters bright, joyful, and peaceful Canadians. He rode that convoy to the Conservative leadership. And then he lost the 2025 election, despite having a 25-point polling lead. Because Canadians looked at the full picture and said, no, we don't want that. He lost his own seat, the seat he had held since 2004. The people who knew him best, they didn't want him. His seat was in Ottawa, one of the stops on the Alto high-speed train rail he has just announced that he would cancel. And now he's back with a $3 million rebrand, new jeans, no glasses, quoting Marcus Aurelius, and waiting for the economic fear to peak so that the flood the zone machine can run again at full speed. This is what we're in for. I want to come back to that Nanos number. 15% of Canadians believe the economy will get stronger. That number is going to be used not to help you, but to harvest you. Here's how the strategy works. You find people who are genuinely scared, and their fear is legitimate. The tariffs are real. The oil prices are real. The gas prices, the increase at the pump, it's real. The uncertainty is real. You don't fix the fear, you feed the fear. You make it bigger. You give it targets. You point at immigrants, at refugees, at government waste, at a broken Canada that only you can repair. And the more scared people are, the less careful they check the math. So they don't notice that immigration numbers are already coming down. They don't notice that rents are declining. They don't notice that refugee healthcare program costs less than 1/5 of what Canadians cost the system. They don't notice that the man promising to fix the housing crisis helped create the housing crisis. Because they're scared. And scared people do not audit the argument. They just want somebody to make the fear stop. This is not a criticism of Canadians. That's human nature. And it is exactly what the playbook is designed to exploit. Bannon said it himself. Flood the zone, make it impossible to keep up, generate the fear, offer the cure, win. The economic pain is real. The cause is being misrepresented. And the solutions being offered will not fix the problem. They will only deepen the anger. I want to be clear about what I'm not saying. I'm not saying Canada has no problems. It does. Housing is still too expensive for too many people. Healthcare has real pressures. Young Canadians are genuinely struggling. Those are real problems that deserve real solutions and honest debate. I'm not saying immigration policy should never be questioned. It should be. The overcorrection was real. And it was right to talk about sustainable levels that match our capacity to absorb and support newcomers. And I'm not saying Pierre Poillievre is wrong about everything. He is not. There are legitimate conservative arguments about the size of government and the pace of spending that deserve to be heard. What I am saying is this. When the economic fear peaks and the Nanos data suggests that we're getting close, the flood the zone machine is going to run harder than it ever has in Canada. More claims, more targets, more noise, and more anger. And the antidote to that is not more anger from the other direction. The antidote is people who check the math. People who ask, who is actually the one who caused the problem? Who look at the data and what the data actually says before they decide who to blame. 15% of Canadians believe things will get better. I think that number should be higher. Not because the problems aren't real, but because Canada has solved hard problems before. It built a transcontinental railway. It built the St. Lawrence Seaway. It put engineers in a capsule headed for the moon. It stared down a bully in the Oval Office and said never 5 times. Those things did not happen because Canadians were angry. They happened because Canadians decided to build something instead. That is the Canada I believe in. This channel isn't a liberal channel. It isn't a conservative channel. It's just trying to think straight so you have the information you need to make up your own mind. Canada deserves better than the arguments we're having. This is the No Spin Up North podcast, and I'll see you on the next episode. If you're enjoying the content, please hit subscribe and like this episode. Thanks, and have a wonderful evening.